Have you ever felt like you're being pulled in every direction, juggling so many different roles and always making everything and everyone else the priority? And in the whirlwind of it all, you've neglected yourself and, most importantly, your health. Well, that was me until one day my body gave me the ultimate wake up call and it changed everything. Hello, I'm Alice Armstrong Scales, and I'd like to share a short story just to explain why I do what I do today and how I hope it will help you. So, when I was 24, I went to live in Paris for 6 months, but instead of returning to London, I decided to set up my own language business there, and I stayed for 24 years. It's quite a long and exciting story, so I'll keep the detailed version for another time. Um, and I'll try and keep this as condensed as possible. So sit back and I hope you enjoy it. In Paris, I was teaching French executives to be compelling communicators in English, so giving presentations, negotiating, networking, socializing, etc. And I was very lucky because once I'd set up, word of mouth spread quite quickly. And before I knew it, I was teaching the very top senior management of some seriously big firms and banks and advertising agencies. I also had the great pleasure of teaching English to the Stade Francais Paris Rugby Club, many of whom played for France, which was very exciting. Anyway, after a few years of doing this, I realized that there was something that all of my clients had in common. When they were working with me individually, their presentations were fantastic by the delivery date. But as soon as they stood up in front of others, especially in front of their French colleagues, they just bottled it. Their self-doubt and their negative self-talk, vous êtes nul en anglais, almost paralyzed them. And it was so distressing to watch them going from being fantastic to just being crippled. So I decided they'd benefit from something much more psychological to help them break through these limiting beliefs. So I did an incredible training in something called NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming, with Robbie Steinhaus and Ed Hines from the NLP School London. I did it in Paris. And I saw such positive results, not only in my clients, but also in me. It was incredible finally being able to change that broken record of limiting beliefs in myself and really unlock my true potential. And, all the baggage I'd been carrying around for so many years just fell off. I remember doing this activity where I visualized myself at the top of a mountain and all the emotional baggage that I'd been carrying was in a heavy backpack. And during the exercise, I imagined cutting the straps of that backpack and literally seeing it rolling down the hill and leaving me free. And I promise I've never felt that burden of that weight ever since. So I'm very grateful to have discovered NLP. And I was so fascinated by it that I went on to train as a master practitioner. And the transformations in my clients and also in a lot of lovely friends who let me practice on them. Thank you, because I know some of you will be tuning into this. Those transformations were incredible, going from a place of self-doubt to self-belief. And from walking into a room of strangers, wishing they could turn straight round and get the hell out, but actually knowing they had to be there, they were able to summon the best version of themselves and get into a really strong, positive, confident state so they could work that room, connect with lots of people, and come away knowing they'd given their best. So over the years, my business grew and I got very involved in other things too. I was singing in the choir at the American Cathedral, and nod to all of you there watching this, and volunteering at the Franco-British Chamber of Commerce, many of whom I'm in touch with today and may well be watching this. So thank you to you too. And I had a wonderful group of friends. But most importantly, during that time, I met my husband, Tim, and we had our three wonderful children there, Poppy, Charlie, and Marcus. But now it comes to the really important chapter that changed the direction of my life. And it's why I do what I do today. So in 2011, my three children were very little, and my husband was traveling abroad a lot for work. And I was juggling so many big projects. I was teaching seminars and workshops. And by then, I was on the board of the Franco British Chamber of Commerce, and I was helping them launch this new exciting English language project. I was also doing lots of fundraising for the bilingual Montessori school where our children had been. Sadly, those days it only went up to age 6, and my two older one had gone to a French local French school. More of that later. And I was organising a huge fundraising gala for the Montessori, as well as just carrying on all the day-to-day stuff of while looking after three small children. Sure you can all relate to that. Looking back on that chapter now, and particularly wearing my personal development high performance hat, I can see that I was not only a people pleaser and totally unable to say no, but I think I was endlessly seeking external validation in order to feel worthy. Anyone else familiar with that? At the same time, one of my children was having a horrible time at his new French school with an awful teacher who made his life a misery. And as any parents who are watching will know, you are only as happy as your most unhappiest child. So basically, it was a year of chronic stress, overwhelm, and exhaustion. And my body tried to give me little warning signs that things weren't quite right. But I chose to ignore them and I just kept going. I told myself that if I could just push through till the end of the school year, when my two older children would be leaving that awful school and starting at a lovely international bilingual school the following September, then I thought everything would be all right and we'd have the long summer holidays to recover. So I ploughed ahead with a few extra cups of coffee during the day and what I thought was a much needed glass of wine or two in the evening to just get on through, get me by. And I kept telling myself that I was resilient, I was built of firm stuff, I was definitely not the sort of person who gives in or says no. Imagine. But in reality, I was in a lot of pain every time I had to stand up and sit down. And my legs and my neck and shoulders hurt even when I was lying in bed at night. But in my mind, I was the Duracell bunny. I just had to keep going and just had to get to the summer holidays, and then would know I could stop. But it suddenly came to a head at the end of June. The fundraising gala was over and had been a huge success. So I'd finished delivering all my seminars, so that had gone very well too. Tick. And on my last day of work, I had raced home to see the children, to buy flowers for the one teacher they did like at that awful school, before running to the British Embassy for a Chamber of Commerce event where I was giving a speech in French. And anyway, ran home, bought the flowers. And as I was walking out of the flower shop, who should I bump into but the awful head teacher from the French school? And oh my goodness, it was like a scene out of a film. She laid into me with such venom for taking the children out of her school. And she blamed everything that could possibly ever have gone wrong in her life on me. And I just stood there with the flowers I literally just stood there looking at her. She was yelling like a woman possessed. And at this stage, people were gathering around because she was making such a noise. Everyone wanted to see what was going on. And it was awful. And also, it was my favorite flower shop where we always bought our Christmas tree every year. So I stood there planted to the spot, let her rant, and was totally lost for words. I'm sure some of you have been in that situation before. Just out of body experience. And when I could finally find my voice, all I could think of to say was, I feel very sorry for you. And I left shaking and in tears because no one had ever yelled such toxic verbal abuse at me like that before. And all I'd done was take my children out of a horrible school. Anyway, I raced home in tears, and the children were horrified to see me in that state and to know that I'd been on the receiving end of this awful woman's horribleness. Luckily, my mother-in-law was there with them. Thank you, Granny. And I then had to quickly get dressed, black tie, put on a brave face, rush to the embassy, ready to give my speech in French. And literally that day was the final straw. I got back from the embassy, having put on my brave face for the last time, and I fell into bed exhausted. But it was almost the end of term. We were almost there. But suddenly I literally couldn't move anymore. I was in absolute agony. And it turned out that my adrenal system had completely collapsed and I had a massive burnout. And as well as that, I was diagnosed with a very painful autoimmune disease called polymyalgia rheumatica, which apparently you shouldn't get till you're much older. But anyway, the French doctors whacked me on a very, very high dosage of steroids, which I then had to stay on for 4 years, plus goodness knows how many other bits of medication, and weekly blood tests and all of that. So anyway, why am I sharing this with you? Because having thought I was invincible, indispensable, and too busy to have any time for myself, let alone practice any self-care, I suddenly couldn't do anything. I literally couldn't do anything. I could hardly walk. I was pretty much bedbound for the next few months. My husband very thoughtfully took us on a lovely holiday so we could all relax and recharge. But I was in so much pain walking that I had to be in a wheelchair at the airport. I never knew back then that by taking as little as 5 minutes every morning to do a positive mindset practice and to do a stress release several times throughout the day would have made all the difference. But I never thought I had time to take care of myself. And honestly, up until then, I think I subconsciously thought that self-care felt a bit selfish, a bit self-indulgent. Anyone else familiar with that mindset? I think it's slightly the way many of us were brought up. Our mothers and grandmothers were the same. It's all about giving to everyone else, giving to the community. Anyway, thanks to my burnout and subsequent autoimmune disease, I read extensively and wanted to understand why and how I'd let myself get into such an incapacitated state. And most importantly, how I could prevent it ever happening again. And how I could use this horrible experience to ensure that others didn't do the same. So I studied emotional intelligence, stress management, positive psychology. I read hundreds of books. And after we moved to England in 2015, I set up Armstrong Scales Coaching and then trained with the incredible Robert Dilts and Stephen Gilligan to become a coach for generative change. And then the absolute icing on the cake, a few years later, I was trained by the world's greatest high performance coach, Brendan Burchard, to be one of his high performance coaches. So now, today, with more than 20 years experience in NLP coaching, plus all that I've learned since my 2011 burnout, I have so many incredible tools in my ever-growing personal development coaching toolbox, if you like. And I have made it my mission to help as many people as possible to not only avoid chronic stress and burnout, but to go from feeling overwhelmed, unproductive, disillusioned, to feeling empowered and re-energized and motivated about the next chapter in their lives where they get to be in the driving seat. I help people develop deeper emotional intelligence skills, and I teach them effective tools and techniques to be able to cope with whatever comes their way. I help them build a strong, positive, resilient mindset so that they can navigate their way through all the tricky things that will inevitably happen. And I enable them to achieve their goals and live happier, more fulfilling and enriched lives. So if any of this resonates with you, I'd love you to come to my free webinar and to do my 5 to Thrive program. You'll be receiving lots of information about that over the next few weeks. So let's thrive together. Yes, life is too short not to. Happy Easter.